Employers. When did instant karma hit someone who thought they were untouchable? Story 1. At our warehouse, the night shift supervisor was a guy named Chad. He was the owner's nephew and acted like royalty. He'd show up late, take long breaks, and dump his work on others, then brag to the owner about how hard he was grinding. Anytime someone tried to call him out, he'd smirk and say, "Good luck getting me fired." One night, our inventory system flagged a huge discrepancy. Thousands of dollars in missing electronics. Security footage was pulled, and there was Chad, stuffing boxes into his trunk. He didn't even try to hide it. We were all shocked. But here's the kicker. Chad called in sick that night and told the boss he was out with the flu. So not only was he stealing, he was dumb enough to lie while being caught on tape. The owner walked in during the next shift meeting, red in the face, and personally escorted Chad out. No HR, no legal buffer, just instant termination. As Chad tried to protest, the owner said, "Untouchable, huh? You're about to touch a jail cell." Cops were already in the parking lot. The place erupted in cheers. Story 2. I worked at a law firm where the senior partner, Dennis, was a tyrant in a tailored suit. He berated assistants, mocked junior lawyers, and once made an intern cry in front of the whole office for bringing him a non-organic muffin. One day, he crossed the line with a paralegal named Morgan. He accused her of incompetence in a client meeting and fired her on the spot. What he didn't know was that Morgan had been documenting every instance of workplace harassment, racial bias, and unethical behavior for months. She walked out without a word. A week later, the firm got slapped with a formal complaint from the State Bar and the EEOC. Turns out Morgan's fiancé worked for a high-profile investigative journalist who took a keen interest in Dennis's behavior. A feature expose followed. Clients dropped the firm like flies. The board forced Dennis to resign for health reasons. We all knew he got destroyed by a woman he tried to humiliate over a muffin. Story 3. At the restaurant I worked in, our general manager, Rick, was the golden boy of corporate. He played golf with the regional director and constantly boasted that he could do anything, and they'd never fire him. So, naturally, he treated everyone like garbage. Cut hours at random, denied breaks, flirted inappropriately with servers, and comped meals for his friends every weekend. Until the day corporate did a surprise visit. They found empty wine bottles in the office. Turns out Rick had been drinking on shift, daily. One of the servers had anonymously submitted a detailed report, including photos, timestamps, and texts from Rick bragging about it. He was terminated on the spot. Even better, the server who submitted the complaint got promoted to assistant manager. She told us later she waited 6 months, gathering evidence. He thought he was untouchable, she said, so I waited until he couldn't wiggle out. Story 4. I worked in tech for a mid-sized company. The head of product, Vanessa, was ruthless. She took credit for every success, blamed others for every failure, and had this smug line she used whenever anyone stood up to her. "If you don't like it, leave. We're not equals." One day, a lead developer named Ray did just that. He quietly resigned, wished us luck, and left. No big drama. But within weeks, things began breaking. Literally, entire codebases collapsed. Servers crashed. No one could find documentation. Turns out, Ray had been the only one documenting the back-end systems. Vanessa had previously cut his request for documentation staff, saying it was a waste of budget. Karma came fast and furious. Clients started dropping. The CTO launched an internal audit. Vanessa tried to deflect, but someone leaked her emails where she dismissed Ray as just a code monkey. She was out within the month. Ray, by the way, got poached by a competitor and now runs his own team. Story 5. My boss, Henry, ran a small design agency and had a habit of flexing how connected he was. He'd berate employees, pay late, and once told a junior designer, "You're lucky to work here. I'd fire you if I didn't need your cheap labor." Then one day, a new client came in. Huge contract, 6 figures. We prepped all week, put together amazing designs, and did the pitch. During the meeting, Henry kept interrupting and talking over the client. At one point, he even made a sexist joke thinking he was being funny. The client, she smiled, closed her folder, and said, "We'll be in touch." She never was. Turns out she was the CMO of a major brand that Henry had been begging to work with for years. She'd finally agreed to a meeting as a favor to someone on her board, and Henry blew it. The board member, the junior designer he tried to humiliate, her dad, the whole office found out. And Henry? He started losing contracts fast. Word spreads quick in our industry. He sold the agency within the year. To a woman. The same one he interrupted. Story 6. At a fashion startup I interned for, the founder, Lila, acted like Anna Wintour on a bender. She made people cry daily, fired anyone who dared take a sick day, and once screamed at a girl for eating a depressing sandwich near her office. She bragged about being a visionary and told us that Everyone's replaceable. Well, turns out she wasn't. We had a high-stakes investor demo coming up, and she insisted on handling it solo. She loved the spotlight. Problem was, she'd delegated the entire back-end build to unpaid interns, fired the only engineer who knew how to make it work, and never tested the app herself. So when she tried to show it off, it crashed. Repeatedly. One investor said, "Is this a joke?" Lila blamed her team, but the investors already knew. Her ex-engineer had sent them a polite, detailed report explaining the product's instability and mismanagement. She didn't just lose funding, they publicly pulled their support on social media. Clients walked. The office shut down within 3 weeks. And yeah, replaceable? Her name became a cautionary tale in tech. Story 7. My uncle ran a small landscaping business. One of his longtime employees, Julio, was loyal, quiet, and never complained. Even when my uncle cut his hours to bring in his new protege, Austin, the cocky 22-year-old son of a golf buddy. Austin would show up late, bark orders, and mock Julio's accent. Everyone hated him, but my uncle just laughed and said, "He's young. He's got vision." Then came the big commercial contract, redesigning a corporate campus. My uncle let Austin lead it. Austin forgot to call in utility lines before digging, hit a gas pipe, evacuation, news crews, a $30,000 fine, and termination of the contract. My uncle tried blaming Julio, but the investigation revealed Austin never filed the paperwork. Instant karma. Austin quit, blaming sabotage. My uncle apologized to Julio, but he was already working for a competitor who valued him. Within a year, they bought my uncle's business. Julio runs it now. Story 8. I worked at a luxury car dealership. Our finance manager, Paul, was the definition of smug. He'd brag about scamming customers into paying thousands in fake, mandatory add-ons, then laugh about how they'd never know. He also routinely hit on women who came in to buy a loan. The guy was gross, but sales were high, so management looked the other way. Then he tried to run the same scam on a woman buying a Porsche Taycan. What he didn't know? She was a consumer protection lawyer, and she recorded everything. A week later, corporate compliance showed up with a legal team. She hadn't just filed a complaint, she'd triggered a class action lawsuit. Paul was escorted out midday. All the managers who covered for him were demoted. Mandatory training rolled in. And the cherry on top? That same woman came back a month later to buy another car, with the video now having 1 million views on TikTok. Story 9. In the 90s, I worked IT for a large telecom company. Our director, Mr. Simmons, was a walking HR violation. Every female employee had a story. I watched him tell a new hire, "Don't dress too smart. You'll intimidate the men." Nobody could touch him. He was a company veteran with deep connections, until one intern secretly recorded him asking for a date in exchange for a raise. She didn't go to HR. She went to the press. It exploded. The story hit the news. The video aired during the evening broadcast, and within 48 hours, Simmons was placed on leave. He tried to fight it, but legal discovered more women with the same story. He was forced into early retirement. But the real karma? The intern got hired by a women-led competitor and later returned to poach 3 of our best engineers. Story 10. At a grocery chain I worked at in high school, the assistant manager, Shelley, ruled with pettiness. She docked pay for clocking in 30 seconds late, banned us from sitting during breaks, and handed out write-ups like candy. She especially hated anyone younger or smarter than her. Then one day, she humiliated a cashier in front of customers for asking a question about refunds. Loudly, rudely, the girl burst into tears and left mid-shift. What Shelley didn't know? That cashier was the regional manager's niece, who had been working undercover after hearing complaints. Shelley was fired the next morning. Her desk was cleared in silence while we pretended not to stare. The niece? She's now the assistant manager. We sit during breaks now, and everyone gets a 5-minute grace period. Story 11. Back when I worked in corporate HR, we had a regional VP named Grant, who was known for 2 things: his Rolex collection and his ability to fire people with zero remorse. Layoffs? He loved them. Once joked in a meeting that crying employees are just the sound of efficiency. He especially hated remote work. He forced dozens of high performers back to the office during a snowstorm to test their loyalty. One woman broke her wrist slipping in the parking lot. He shrugged. Then the CEO's nephew, also remote, missed a performance goal. Grant fired him too, except he didn't know who he was firing. The CEO called an emergency board meeting. Grant tried to justify it with charts and buzzwords. Didn't work. He was let go that night. No farewell email, no speech. His last act as VP, getting escorted out with his ergonomic chair in tow. We kept the wrist brace in the HR office as a trophy. Story 12. In a small publishing house I worked at, the editor-in-chief, Clarissa, thought she was a literary god. She trashed manuscripts publicly, ridiculed young writers, and loved humiliating interns in meetings. One day, an intern named Jonah submitted a short story for a contest we ran. She laughed at it in front of the entire team and said, "This reads like fan fiction written by a bored teen." Embarrassing. Jonah didn't say anything, just left quietly that afternoon. 2 months later, that very story won a national short fiction prize under a pseudonym. The literary community blew up over it. Every editor wished they'd published it. Clarissa still didn't know. Then the author came forward on Twitter. It was Jonah. The backlash was instant. The tweet included a screenshot of her cruel email. Authors pulled submissions, staff quit. The board asked her to step down. She did, with a final tweet that was ratioed into oblivion. Jonah, he's now an associate editor, and much, much kinder. Story 13. I was working in construction. Our foreman, Rick, was one of those old-school guys who treated OSHA regulations like suggestions, constantly told us to stop whining about safety gear, and berated anyone who raised concerns. One morning, he forced a new guy to carry heavy steel beams up a wet ramp, ignoring his protests about it being unsafe. "You afraid of sweat or just weak?" he yelled. An hour later, Rick tripped on the same ramp and broke his ankle. Instant karma. But the kicker? While waiting for the ambulance, he tried to bark orders from the ground. The new guy looked at him and said, "Weak ankles, huh?" Rick was off for 6 weeks, and the project ran smoother without him. When he came back, the company had quietly promoted someone else. Story 14. At a boutique marketing agency, our creative director, Heather, was adored by clients but hated by her team. She'd take our ideas, rebrand them as her own, then tear us apart if we questioned anything. She always said, "My name is the brand. Your job is to keep it clean." One day, she pitched a major campaign to a tech client using a concept I'd personally written. I hadn't even been invited to the meeting. But she didn't know I'd sent that same concept, under a pseudonym, to an industry newsletter. The client loved the pitch, but asked, "Didn't this already appear in Brand Pulse Weekly?" Heather panicked. The client pulled the contract, citing ethical concerns. Word got around. She tried blaming the team, but the timestamps told the truth. Her reputation, gone. She now teaches branding seminars on LinkedIn. I sometimes watch them for the cringe. Story 15. I was in a retail job at a luxury mall where the floor manager, Tina, acted like she ran the Louvre. She micromanaged everyone, belittled part-timers, and handed out write-ups for things like not folding with enough emotion. She also used to steal tips from the shared jar, assuming nobody would call her out. Then came a secret shopper visit, except the shopper was actually the district manager's cousin, who Tina had screamed at over socks, called her an idiot with no taste, literally over socks. 2 days later, Tina was called into the back office. She came out pale, holding her purse like it was a child. We found out later she'd been demoted to floor associate in another store an hour away. The next week, the tip jar was full for once. Story 16. I used to work at a nonprofit where the executive director, Sandra, acted like she was doing God's work. And maybe she was, but she did it with a God complex. She made staff stay late without pay, refused to approve mental health days, and even once said, "Burnout isn't real. It's just weak people with email access." But what she really loved? Public speaking. She'd force interns to ghostwrite her talks, then strut on stage like she'd written every word herself. One conference, she ad-libbed a section trying to sound deep. Problem? She quoted a paragraph word for word from a blog she'd mocked earlier, except the original author was in the audience and had the receipts. Sandra got fact-checked live on Twitter. The clip went viral under the hashtag number #NotYourWordsSandra. Donors pulled out. The board met privately. She was asked to step aside for organizational integrity. Her replacement? One of those interns. Story 17. When I worked at a small-town diner, our owner Steve was your classic big fish in a small pond type. Thought he was untouchable because he'd employ half the county. He routinely underpaid workers, laughed about skimming from the tip pool, and made inappropriate comments to the younger staff. But the final straw came during a town fundraiser. Steve donated a check publicly and gave this long performative speech about giving back. Thing is, he wrote the check from the employee payroll account. That Monday, paychecks bounced. We were furious. A part-time waitress called a local reporter, who dug into Steve's finances. It hit the local news like a lightning bolt. Unpaid taxes, bounced checks, misappropriation of charitable funds. The health department got involved too. The diner closed within a month. Steve now runs a bait shop no one goes to. Locals call it the Karma Shack. Story 18. In a software company I briefly worked for, there was this senior engineer named Mark. Legend had it he built the original system architecture, so he walked around like he was invincible. He refused code reviews, mocked junior devs, and constantly blocked updates because his way was cleaner. One day we had a critical system outage. Mark was off on vacation but had locked access to key recovery scripts behind his personal password. Nobody could fix it. Thousands of users were affected. The CEO called him in a panic. Mark replied with, "That's not my problem, I told you not to change my stuff." So the CTO called someone else, a quiet dev named Liana, who had cloned Mark's architecture 6 months earlier, just in case. She restored the system in under an hour. The next company-wide call, Mark was gone. Liana got promoted. Her new job? Rewriting everything Mark ever touched. Story 19. I was in a warehouse job during college. We had this guy, Todd, who was technically a safety supervisor. In reality, he sat in the office, watched football on his tablet, and occasionally yelled, "Keep those helmets on." One day, a pallet fell near the loading dock, barely missing a temp worker. The investigation showed that the straps were old, worn, and flagged in an earlier report that Todd had deleted to keep things efficient. Corporate came in fast. Turns out there was a paper trail, digital records of the deleted reports, screenshots, even a Slack message where Todd joked, "It's not a problem if you don't log it." He was fired by lunchtime. His last words? "I didn't think anyone actually read that stuff." Now we have a new safety lead, the same temp worker who nearly got crushed. Story 20. At a music school I taught at, the director, Nolan, was known for one thing, being a former child prodigy. He rode that reputation hard, using it to belittle other teachers and make weird power plays with parents. If a student got too good, Nolan would sabotage their schedule so he could take credit if they succeeded. One year, a gifted violin student, Sasha, won a regional competition and was invited to perform solo at a televised gala. Nolan insisted he should introduce her on stage, said it was tradition, except when he got the mic, he went off script and started praising himself, how he trained Sasha from the ground up, even though he'd never taught her. Her parents were livid. They uploaded comparison clips of Sasha's real teacher, Ms. Chang, one of our quietest but most dedicated instructors. The video went viral in classical music circles. Nolan became a meme. He was removed a week later. Ms. Chang got a write-up in Strings magazine, and Sasha, full scholarship to Juilliard. Story 21. I worked at a real estate office where the top broker, Denise, treated everyone like her personal assistant. She talked over clients, snapped at reception, and had this line she repeated constantly. "I closed deals, not doors." No one really liked her, but she brought in money, so she got away with it. Then one day, she screamed at our janitor, Mr. James, for mopping too loudly during her open house. "If you can't stay quiet, maybe you don't belong here," she said in front of everyone. What she didn't know? Mr. James wasn't just a janitor. He was the owner's uncle, retired Army colonel, and someone the CEO deeply respected. The whole staff had been warned not to treat him differently because he liked earning his keep. Denise was told to apologize. She refused, saying he should know his place. She was terminated that afternoon. Her desk was cleared before lunch. The next day, Mr. James brought in donuts for everyone, except her. Story 22. I used to work at a wedding photography agency. Our lead photographer, Chase, had the worst ego I've ever seen. He treated second shooters like dirt, sabotaged their editing folders, and once said, "Only my lens tells the story." He was especially cruel to one guy, Brian, who was quiet and used older gear. Chase mocked him constantly, saying he was shooting weddings with potatoes. Then came the viral moment. Brian captured a spontaneous, breathtaking shot of a bride comforting her crying grandmother. It hit Instagram and exploded. Everyone assumed Chase took it. He let them believe it for a week. But when a national wedding blog contacted the agency for an interview, Brian submitted the original RAW file, timestamped. The blog ran the full piece, crediting Brian. Chase flipped. He tried claiming Brian used his angles, whatever that means. The agency owner didn't buy it. Chase was demoted. Brian was offered partnership. And now, Chase assists the guy he called a potato. Story 23. I worked in a hospital admin office. Our supervisor, Alan, was a paper pusher with a dictator complex. He denied PTO requests arbitrarily, hovered over people's screens, and had a weird obsession with catching people wasting time. His favorite phrase was, "You're lucky you work here." Then one day, Alan accidentally CC'd the entire office on a reply all chain meant for HR. In it, He mocked a co-worker's medical condition, calling her our very own drama queen with a doctor's note. It spread like wildfire. The woman he mocked? She had lupus, and the hospital CEO's daughter had the same illness. When she saw it, she forwarded it directly to the top. Alan was let go for personal development reasons the next day. Nobody missed him, except maybe the printer, which finally stopped jamming from stress. Story 24. At a university I briefly taught at, the Dean of Student Affairs, Mr. Cargill, was a tyrant in a blazer. He regularly dismissed student complaints, pushed for dress codes that targeted certain groups, and blocked mental health initiatives because they were too soft. Then, during a town hall live stream, a student asked a question about increasing counseling resources. Cargill laughed and said, "On mic, college is for learning, not crying." Within hours, the clip was viral. National news picked it up. Students staged a sit-in. Alumni pulled donations. The university's PR team went into full panic mode. By the next board meeting, Cargill was transitioning to retirement. His golden plaque came down. The Wellness Center? It got double funding and was renamed after the student who asked the question. Story 25. In a high-end jewelry store I once worked in, the manager, Felix, had a reputation for being two-faced. Polite to clients, cruel to staff. He'd berate us over tiny smudges, dock pay for over-polishing, and brag about never being written up in 15 years. But karma came quietly. A customer came in asking about a missing diamond earring. Said she'd only noticed when she got home. Felix brushed her off. Insisted she must have lost it at brunch. Problem: the customer was an undercover loss prevention agent testing store, Integrity, after a string of complaints. She returned the next day with a hidden cam clip. It showed Felix pocketing the earring from the cleaning tray, saying, "These rich ladies lose more than they buy." He was arrested on site. The store installed new surveillance and the rest of us got a raise. Story 26. I worked in a bakery chain where the district manager, Rachel, was the queen of quotas. She'd storm in, rip down posters, throw out non-compliant pastries, and once told a teen employee her handwriting was hurting the brand. She loved humiliating store managers, except the one in our town, Lenny. Lenny was calm, kind, and unshakable. He'd just nod and say, "Sure, Rachel," then go back to helping staff mix dough. One day, Rachel came in mid-lunch rush and decided to inspect the ovens while berating Lenny. She yanked open the industrial door mid-bake and shouted, "Smells burnt! Who ruined this?" Steam hit her full force. Her mascara melted. Eyebrows singed. Lenny calmly handed her a burn kit and said, "You might want to check the safety manual next time." Corporate got wind of the injury, then reviewed all her inspections. Turns out she'd been faking safety certifications to boost her bonus. She was fired. Lenny got promoted. And the teen with bad handwriting? She does our branding now. Story 27. At a mobile game company, the CEO's golden boy, Josh, was the creative director despite having zero game design experience. He'd shoot down everyone's ideas, push out rushed updates, and say things like, "Gamers are dumb. Flashy colors equals cash." One day, he forced the dev team to implement a super predatory loot box system with a chance to win exclusive content. Except the drop rate was secretly 0%. He thought no one would notice. But someone did. A player with a YouTube channel exposed the scam using code inspection and statistical breakdowns. The video hit 1 million views in 48 hours. Reddit exploded. Streamers boycotted the game. App Store ratings tanked overnight. Investors freaked out. Josh tried to blame toxic gamers. He was ousted in a board vote the following Monday. The dev who originally objected to the loot box? He's now running creative and got invited to speak at GDC. Story 28. My first office job was at a furniture company. The logistics manager, Kevin, had a thing for bullying drivers. If they were late, he screamed. If they had questions, he mocked them. He'd literally radio in and say, "Cry me a river, then cross it." Everyone hated him. But he made the trucks run on time, so upper management ignored the complaints. Then one day, he called in sick, but accidentally left his walkie on during a call with a friend. Loud and clear over dispatch, he joked about how easy it was to log false delays and bill overtime to the company. Then he added, "What are they going to do? Fire their best guy?" One of the drivers recorded it, shared it with HR. Turns out Kevin had skimmed tens of thousands through fake deliveries. He was gone within the day. The driver who turned it in, promoted to dispatch lead. Now he says, "Let's cross rivers, not lines." Story 29. In my high school job at a local movie theater, the GM, Curtis, was a legend in his own mind. He boasted about his 15 years of leadership, but in reality, He just watched movies in the projection booth while workers did double shifts. He underpaid new hires, hoarded the tip pool, and made us clean puke without gloves to toughen us up. Then one weekend, he left a group of 16-year-olds alone during a Marvel premiere while he snuck off for a date. A customer got injured after slipping in a soda puddle that had been ignored for hours. They sued. The investigation showed Curtis hadn't worked a real shift in 3 months. He was billing overtime while clocked out. Also had security footage of him napping on the snack counter. Fired. Banned from company properties. I heard he now reviews movies on TikTok. Comments are brutal. Story 30. At a private school, the head of admissions, Mrs. Dorsey, was terrifying. She'd interview 6th graders like they were applying to Harvard and proudly reject students based on gut feeling. Her favorite line, "We're not just looking for smart, we're looking for pedigree." She once rejected a kid for messy shoes. His family was crushed. His mom politely asked for a meeting. Dorsey rolled her eyes and said they weren't the right fit. Problem is, his mom was a Pulitzer-winning journalist. She wrote an op-ed about elitism in private education. Didn't name the school directly, but clues were obvious. The story blew up. Donations dropped. Local media picked it up. The board got nervous. Mrs. Dorsey was reassigned. The kid? Accepted into a more inclusive academy with a scholarship sponsored by readers of the article. Story 31. I once worked at a dental clinic where the lead hygienist, Tamara, ruled with passive-aggressive tyranny. She wasn't management but acted like it, scheduling people without permission, hiding supplies to punish coworkers, and sucking up to the dentist with fake sweet talk. She especially hated our new receptionist, Nia, who was younger, efficient, and didn't bow to Tamara's ego. Tamara tried everything, spread rumors, misfiled her documents, and even accused her of HIPAA violations. Then one day, Nia calmly walked into the break room holding her phone. Turns out, Nia had been quietly recording every time Tamara made a false claim or manipulated records, which was illegal, by the way. But here's the twist. Nia wasn't just a receptionist. She was a pre-law student doing part-time work before starting her internship, with a cousin on the state dental board. Tamara was fired within 48 hours after an audit. Her license was flagged. Nia? She left on her own terms, with a glowing letter of recommendation signed by the same dentist Tamara worshipped. Story 32. At a popular indie bookstore, the owner, Gerald, was beloved by customers. But the staff knew better. He refused breaks, mocked disabled employees, and made people work unpaid overtime, justifying it as paying dues to literature. One winter, a barista slipped on icy steps. When she asked for workers' comp paperwork, Gerald laughed and said, "You're not hurt, you're clumsy." She filed a report herself. OSHA got involved. Turns out Gerald hadn't maintained insurance in 2 years. Multiple former staff came forward with similar stories. The audit uncovered falsified timesheets and expired food licenses for the cafe area. He tried playing the victim in a tearful Facebook post, but the comments were brutal, and several customers publicly cut ties. The store stayed open, but Gerald sold it within a month. New owners hired back half the staff and introduced paid breaks and healthcare. First change on the wall, a framed poster that said, "Pay dues, not pain." Story 33. In a warehouse electronics store, we had this inventory supervisor, Malik, who thought he was running the CIA. He refused to explain policies, threatened firings constantly, and told new hires, "The cameras see everything, just to mess with them." But Malik had a habit. He stole returned products, subtle stuff, phones, earbuds, gaming mice. He'd rebox junk parts, log them as disposed, and sell the good stuff on his brother's eBay. He got bold, too bold, decided to confiscate a brand new iPad from a return cart during a staff meeting. What he didn't know, the iPad had remote tracking enabled, and the customer had flagged it as stolen before dropping it off. The serial number was already on file. When it pinged in the break room, loss prevention followed the signal and found it in Malik's backpack. He was escorted out in front of everyone. The GM quietly handed out cupcakes that afternoon, chocolate with gold sprinkles. Story 34. I worked for a wedding planner named Dorian who thought he was a god. He promised dream events and delivered drama. He'd scream at caterers, belittle florists, and force staff to skip meals during 14-hour setups. His mantra, "If they can't take pressure, they don't deserve luxury." Then came the mayor's daughter's wedding. Dorian triple-booked 2 vendors, misprinted the schedule, and forgot the ice order entirely. When the tent AC failed, he vanished to a hotel spa, leaving junior staff to handle chaos in 90-degree heat. The bride's mother personally tracked him down and fired him at the altar. To save the day, one of the overlooked assistants, Mel, took charge and coordinated the whole event. Guests praised her, vendors rallied around her, and the mayor thanked her in his speech. Mel now owns her own firm. Half the vendors followed her. Dorian, he sells luxury planner e-courses to people who don't Google. Story 35. In a high-end clothing store, the regional manager, Lyle, prided himself on not hiring ugly people. He'd tell recruiters to filter for aesthetics and frequently criticize staff for looking tired or not aspirational. One day, a young associate named Priya asked if she could wear a scarf to cover a chemo scar. Lyle pulled her aside and said, "We need healthy vibes on the floor. Maybe now's not the right time to be here." She quit on the spot, and her sister, a fashion TikToker with a massive following, posted a story titled, "This is what pretty gets you." The video exploded. Celebrities shared it. The brand trended, for all the wrong reasons. Corporate fired Lyle in under 72 hours. They issued a formal apology and asked Priya to help advise their inclusion policy. She agreed, on one condition: they post it publicly with her name attached. They did. Story 36. I worked at a ski resort in Colorado. Our operations director, Stan, was a local legend, according to himself. He'd been there for 20 years, acted like he built the mountain, and treated seasonal staff like disposable snowflakes. One winter, he refused to close a section of the slope despite warnings about ice. Patrol begged him to shut it down after 2 minor injuries, but Stan said, "We're not shutting a slope for crybabies." That afternoon, Stan went out to prove it was fine. He wiped out badly, shattered his collarbone, and had to be airlifted out on the same rescue sled he mocked earlier that week. His absence triggered a full review. Turns out Stan had falsified dozens of maintenance logs and ignored documented warnings. He was fired before he even got out of his sling. The rescue sled? They named it Stanley. Story 37. At a private architecture firm, there was this partner, Elise, who never drew a line of her own. She'd take junior designers' blueprints, change a few details, and present them as her genius. She had a favorite line: "If your work's good enough to steal, consider it a compliment." One intern, David, was fed up. So for a prestigious client presentation, he included a signature flourish in the render, a stairwell that looped back on itself, leading nowhere. He told Elise it was abstract symbolism. She laughed and pitched it with confidence. The client, an urban housing developer, noticed immediately. This is a trap for the elderly. Word got back to the firm's biggest investor. Elise was removed from all client-facing roles. David got promoted to junior architect, with a new clause in his contract: all contributions must be properly credited. Story 38. In a call center I worked in, the floor manager, Troy, had a god complex. He muted people's calls to laugh at their voices, tracked bathroom breaks with a stopwatch, and said things like, "I control your time," literally. He especially hated our quietest agent, Miguel, who had a stutter. Troy once told him to speed it up or find a job at a library. What Troy didn't know, Miguel had been logging everything, every insult, every name-calling session, and compiling it into a formal report. But he didn't file it through HR. He filed it with a labor attorney. One morning, a man in a suit came in and asked for Troy by name. 15 minutes later, Troy was called into the conference room. He didn't come out for an hour. The next day, HR rolled out a new culture initiative, and Miguel transferred to a higher-paying support team. No more phones, no more Troy. Story 39. At a local vet clinic, the head doctor, Dr. Larson, was respected by clients and absolutely despised by his staff. He'd overbook animals, skip lunch breaks, and regularly scream at vet techs in front of pet owners. His worst habit? Declaring emergencies just to avoid paperwork. Once made a nurse euthanize a dog without waiting for full test results, only to later find out the machine had a glitch. The staff had enough. One of the techs, Kayla, secretly contacted the pet's owner, who had already suspected malpractice. A formal complaint turned into a lawsuit, then a licensing review. The kicker? Dr. Larson didn't lose his license. He lost insurance coverage. No provider would back him. The clinic rehired under new leadership. Kayla became lead tech. The new house rule: if you're yelling, you're wrong. Story 40. I worked at a haunted house attraction. Yes, really. And our creative director, Blake, was more interested in scaring the actors than the guests. He'd hide in costume, jump out at staff, scream in people's ears, and called HR a Halloween myth. He fired someone once for sneezing in character. "Killers don't sneeze," he said. Then, on Halloween night, he tried to prank a fire inspector by locking him in the basement scare maze and cutting the lights. Problem? The inspector was not amused. Blake was reported for endangerment and obstruction. The attraction was shut down on its busiest night. Thousands in refunds. The company replaced him immediately and offered free tickets to everyone affected. Now there's a new scare at the attraction. A wax dummy of Blake with a fired tag. It gets the biggest laughs of the night. Story 41. I worked at a non-profit art gallery where the board president, Marianne, treated it like her personal playground. She threw lavish donor parties with funds earmarked for student programs, commissioned portraits of herself, and told staff, "Without me, this place is a glorified thrift shop." The breaking point came when she canceled a youth art showcase because she didn't want finger paintings cluttering the exhibit space during her champagne gala. One of the art teachers had enough. She leaked emails, invoices, and internal memos to a local journalist. The article dropped like a bomb. It outlined years of financial abuse, misuse of donor money, and verbal mistreatment of interns. Even donors were quoted anonymously. The board held an emergency vote. Marianne was ousted within the week. Now, the youth art program has its own permanent gallery wing, funded entirely by donations made after she left. Story 42. In a small-town diner, the head cook, Bert, acted like he was Gordon Ramsay's meaner cousin. He'd scream at waitresses, spit on plates when customers sent food back, and kept a running tally of who was too dumb to work a fryer. He was especially brutal to teens, shouting at them for forgetting napkins or tripping under pressure. One high schooler, Emma, quit mid-shift after he told her to go back to babysitting and leave the work to adults. Her dad came in the next morning, not to fight. Just sat, ordered coffee, and waited. Turns out, he was a health inspector, out of jurisdiction until that week. 3 violations, 1 suspended license. Bert was fired that afternoon. Emma got a new part-time job at the library, where people say please. Story 43. At a startup in the ed tech space, we had a CTO named Julian who thought he was the next Steve Jobs. He ignored QA, rolled out updates at 2 a.m., and once told a developer, "You're not here to ask questions. You're here to build what I imagine." He pushed a massive update days before a school district contract demo, broke every login system. Teachers couldn't access classrooms. Students lost work. Julian tried blaming interns. But an engineer had archived a GitHub thread where Julian had overridden the team's warnings with "ship it or shut it." The school pulled the contract. But worse, a major competitor scooped the story and used it as a marketing weapon. Investors revolted. Julian was booted by a unanimous vote. The CEO later admitted, "Turns out vision without listening is just ego." Story 44. I worked in a boutique hotel where the general manager, Silas, was charming to guests and monstrous behind closed doors. He'd manipulate schedules to avoid paying overtime, guilt-trip housekeepers into skipping breaks, and punished anyone who dared call out sick. Then came a booking error. A wedding party arrived. No rooms were actually reserved. Silas blamed the front desk girl, Tanya, and fired her on the spot. What he didn't know? Tanya had already submitted her 2 weeks' notice and had screenshots showing Silas had deleted the reservation email himself, trying to avoid overbooking penalties. The bride's family posted about the disaster, screenshots included. It went viral on wedding TikTok. The hotel got flooded with negative reviews. Corporate stepped in. Silas was gone within days. Tanya? She now manages a bed and breakfast that books solid every weekend. Guess who showed up last month trying to apply? Story 45. At a public library, the head librarian, Greg, had turned what should have been a peaceful space into a control freak's kingdom. He banned staff from decorating their desks, rejected community events unless he personally approved them, and once told a volunteer group, "This isn't a playground for peasants." He particularly hated the monthly comic book club, run by a teenager named Luis. Greg said graphic novels weren't real reading, so he canceled the program without telling anyone. Luis posted about it online. It went viral in the local comic scene. Then a small comic publisher picked it up and hosted a pop-up event at the park next door. Hundreds showed up. Media came. The library board did damage control immediately. Greg was reassigned to archives. Luis was invited back, with his club, now sponsored by that same publisher. And yes, they renamed the meeting room Luis Lounge. Story 46. I worked in a high-end hair salon where the owner, Jax, treated himself like a celebrity stylist. Even though his only real skill was screaming at people while holding scissors, he'd charge insane fees, take all the walk-ins, and bully stylists into working double shifts. His biggest red flag? He'd sabotage stylists by accidentally double booking them, and then take their clients when they couldn't keep up. One of those stylists, a soft-spoken guy named Eli, lost 4 regulars to this trick. Then came a celebrity client, booked under Eli's name. Jax found out, switched the appointment, and did the cut himself. Disaster. The client blasted the salon on social media with before and after pics and tagged the wrong name, Jax's. Within 48 hours, reviews tanked. Stylists walked out. The landlord locked the doors over unpaid fees. Eli now runs a boutique salon across town with a waitlist. Jax works at a blow-dry bar. Story 47. I worked at a family-run auto shop where the owner's son, Ryan, had no mechanical skills but full control. He'd strut around yelling at techs, upcharge customers, and once told a client their brakes were spiritually misaligned. He loved playing the alpha boss role, until one day he tried to scam an older lady by charging her for a new transmission she didn't need. Bad move. She calmly paid, left, and came back with her son. Her son was an undercover investigator with the state's Consumer Fraud Division. A week later, Ryan was hit with a subpoena. Investigators found dozens of inflated invoices. The shop lost its license. His dad retired in shame. And Ryan? Last I heard, he's trying to start a car detailing business on Facebook Marketplace. No reviews, for good reason. Story 48. I used to work at a corporate toy company. The VP of product, Lorraine, was known for cutting corners and claiming brilliance. She once stole a junior designer's prototype idea and pitched it as hers to the board, without changing a single detail. That product hit shelves, but it had a major design flaw. One piece posed a choking hazard. Complaints came in fast. Lorraine blamed the junior, even though she'd signed off on every doc herself. Then a watchdog blogger caught wind of it and published all the internal memos. How? The junior had kept copies and forwarded them to the reporter. It turned into a national story. Lorraine was quoted by name. She resigned the next day. The junior offered a full-time lead role with back royalties for the design. Lorraine now runs a blog about toxic office culture. Ironically, Story 49. At a software consulting firm, we had a VP named Harold who loved humiliating people in meetings. He used phrases like, "Are you even listening to yourself?" and "That's why you're not paid to think." One Monday, he laid into a junior data analyst, Mia, for misinterpreting a client metric. Except she hadn't. She tried to explain, and he cut her off in front of 20 people. The next day, the client requested a data call with Mia. During the call, she pulled up a dashboard and calmly walked the client through their analytics, correcting Harold's errors live without naming him. The client emailed the CEO, praising Mia's clarity and requesting she be their primary contact going forward. Harold was removed from the account. 2 weeks later, the CEO restructured. Mia became data team lead. Harold quietly offered a consulting opportunity elsewhere. Story 50. At a regional airline, we had a gate manager named Leslie who was infamous for yelling at flight attendants, mocking ground crew, and power tripping over luggage policies. She once denied a mother the ability to check a stroller because she looked too entitled. But the real mess happened when she berated a pilot for being late, even though his delay was weather-related and cleared by dispatch. That pilot happened to be a 25-year veteran and the airline's chief safety officer's brother. He filed an official grievance with timestamps, radio logs, and statements from crew. An internal review showed Leslie had racked up 18 formal complaints. She'd been protected by a now-retired regional director. No more buffer. She was fired 2 weeks later. Her replacement? A former gate agent she used to insult daily for smiling too much. Flights run smoother now. Even the coffee tastes better. Story 51. I worked at a high-end flower shop that catered to celebrity clients. The store manager, Alina, treated the designers like dirt. She'd snatch arrangements and redo them just to prove a point, then tell customers she personally created everything. Her worst behavior? She'd take tips from event clients and keep them for herself, claiming it protected the brand from favoritism. One weekend, a wedding client came in with a huge budget. She asked specifically for Jess, one of our most talented designers, to handle the entire floral layout. Alina intercepted every communication, did her own version of the design, and refused to let Jess attend the setup. Except, she misread the time zone. Flowers showed up 4 hours late, wilting in the sun. Turns out the bride was a wedding planner with 40,000 Instagram followers. She posted the disaster with screenshots from emails, proving Jess had created the original plan, and that Alina had blocked her. Corporate got flooded with complaints. Alina was fired. Jess got a promotion, and the planner offered her freelance gigs on the spot. Story 52. In a small game studio, the art director, Nate, loved to humiliate interns. His favorite insult was, "You're not an artist, you're a Photoshop filter." He'd tear apart their drafts in front of the whole team, only to quietly use their best ideas later. One intern, Cam, created a beautifully detailed character sheet that Nate trashed, calling it fanfic garbage. But weeks later, the character appeared in a studio teaser, almost identical. Cam didn't say anything, just forwarded screenshots and timestamps to the publisher. Why? Because Cam's uncle was a licensing rep for that publisher. They flagged it immediately. Turns out, Nate had used unapproved content in a promotional build, violating IP contracts. The publisher pulled funding until the studio cleaned house. Nate was fired. Cam got hired full-time with a title bump. The character? Renamed and rebranded, with Cam in the credits. Story 53. I worked in a large law firm's mailroom. The office manager, Trevor, was a mid-level tyrant who believed wearing a suit gave him divine rights. He barked orders at janitors, refused to learn anyone's name unless they were lawyers, and once told me, "No one cares what the mail guy thinks." I noticed something strange. Boxes of documents disappearing before delivery. One day, a partner asked why a court filing wasn't delivered. I told him I'd handed it off to Trevor as instructed. He froze. Turns out, Trevor had been trashing documents to sabotage a rival paralegal he hated, hoping to get her fired. Instead, the partner called in IT. They checked footage, tracked access logs, and confronted him. He was fired and escorted out in silence. The paralegal got promoted. Now she always waves to the mailroom. Story 54. In a boutique fitness studio, the co-owner, Maya, was obsessed with appearances. Not fitness, appearances. She'd berate instructors for gaining weight, secretly lower the AC to make clients sweat more, and use studio funds to get Botox while underpaying staff. Then she fired a beloved yoga teacher for not vibing with the brand, aka being over 40. That teacher posted her story on a local moms group, which spiraled into something huge. Former clients shared their experiences. Former employees joined in. Photos of Maya partying in branded gear while drunk made the rounds. A few influencers dropped the studio partnership publicly. 1 week later, the studio's bookings were down 60%. The silent partner stepped in. Maya was removed. The older teacher was offered her job back. She politely declined and opened her own studio nearby. Now, Maya's old place mostly hosts bachelorette parties and coupon classes. Story 55. I worked at a publishing imprint known for edgy fiction. Our editor-in-chief, Blake, fancied himself a literary genius. He mocked interns, rewrote authors without permission, and once threw a manuscript in the trash, yelling, "This belongs in a gas station bathroom." The author? A debut writer from a marginalized community. One junior editor retrieved the manuscript, quietly cleaned it up, and submitted it to an independent contest. It won. The story got picked up by a rival imprint, sold out first print, landed a movie deal. Blake didn't know until he saw the book at a launch party he attended, where the author quoted the gas station bathroom line on stage, naming no names, but everyone knew. The rival imprint offered the junior editor a job. She took it. Blake tried to save face, but word spread. Authors dropped out. His reputation? Flushed? No pun intended.